The swing set stood there in the afternoon sun, mocking me. Bright primary colors, sturdy wooden frame, two swings gently swaying in the breeze. Maya was trying to go high enough to touch the leaves of the oak tree, her laughter echoing through the backyard. Leo was contentedly digging in the sandbox attached to the side, occasionally looking up to narrate his construction project to a plastic dinosaur. A perfect picture of suburban bliss. And apparently, according to the stiff, offensively beige envelope in my hand, a blatant violation of community standards. Final notice, non-compliant recreational apparatus, violation hash HOA 912C. Non-compliant recreational apparatus. Seriously. It sounded like I'd installed a black market bouncy castle, or a trebuchet aimed at the community pool. It was a swing set, for crying out loud, bought from Costco, assembled over one very long Saturday involving confusing instructions, 3 skinned knuckles, and language that would make a sailor blush. But the kids loved it, which I suspected was precisely the problem, at least for one particular neighbor. This had Carol Perkins' perfectly manicured fingerprints all over it. Lisa came out onto the patio, shielding her eyes from the sun. Anything good in the mail, or just the usual junk and bills? I held up the certified mail envelope, feeling the familiar prickle of HOA-induced rage. Define good. If good means a final demand from the Oak Creek Meadows Homeowners Association ordering the immediate removal of our children's primary source of backyard joy, then yes, it's fantastic news. Lisa sighed, a sound I'd come to associate with any interaction involving our HOA or Carol Perkins, who unfortunately held the dual roles of next-door neighbor and HOA president/supreme leader. Not the swing set again. I thought we dealt with this. Oh, we dealt with it, I said bitterly. We dealt with the initial passive-aggressive notes left on the doorstep about visual clutter. We dealt with Carol measuring its distance from the property line with a tape measure while pretending to admire our azaleas. We dealt with the first official warning letter citing Bylaw Appendix G, subsection 14B, paragraph 3, unsightly yard equipment. We even dealt with that utterly humiliating Zoom HOA meeting where Carol lectured us for 15 minutes about aesthetic harmony while the rest of the board nodded like bobbleheads. And they still want it gone? Lisa asked, disbelief warring with weary resignation. What's the official reason this time? I consulted the letter, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's see. Here we go. Multiple infractions cited. First, color palette inconsistent with Appendix D, Section 9 approved exterior hues. Apparently, primary blue and yellow are too garish for Oak Creek Meadows. We're strictly and earth tones and muted neutrals kind of place. It's a children's swing set. Exactly. Second, visible structure exceeding 6 feet in height, impacting neighborhood sightlines and potentially diminishing curb appeal. Heaven forbid someone driving by catch a glimpse of childhood joy. And my personal favorite, third, potential for attracting unsupervised juveniles from adjacent properties, posing a liability risk to the association. It's code, Lisa. It's pure, unadulterated Carol speak for, I hate seeing your kids have fun, and their laughter interrupts my afternoon nap. So, what now? Lisa sank into a patio chair. Can we appeal again? Maybe paint it beige. Would they allow a beige swing set? The thought was so depressing it was almost funny. We already appealed, remember? Shot down in flames, said it set a dangerous precedent. Apparently, swing sets are the gateway drug to tire swings, trampolines, and eventually people painting their houses chartreuse and parking RVs on the lawn. According to Carol, anyway. This letter says we have 10 days. 10 days to dismantle the offending apparatuses or face daily fines starting at $75. $75 a day for a swing set. The injustice burned. This wasn't just about some plastic and wood. This swing set was Maya's 7th birthday present. I'd spent hours putting it together, envisioning summer afternoons filled with the sound of them playing. It was their little kingdom back here. Taking it down felt like admitting defeat, like letting Carol and her beige brigade win. Later that evening, after a subdued dinner where Maya kept asking if the swing set police were coming, Lisa and I faced the grim task. Breaking the news. We sat them down on the living room couch, the cheerful sounds from the backyard now replaced by the drone of the TV. "Hey guys," I started, trying to sound casual and failing miserably. "We need to talk about the swing set." Maya's eyes immediately filled with suspicion. "What about it? Did Leo break it?" "No, I didn't," Leo protested, looking alarmed. "Nobody broke it, sweetie," Lisa said gently, pulling Leo onto her lap. "It's just, you know how we have neighborhood rules? Like how Daddy can't leave the trash cans out too long?" "Yeah," Maya said slowly. "Well," I took a deep breath. "There's a rule about big things in the yard, and some people think the swing set is too big and too colorful, so the neighborhood association says we have to take it down." Silence. Then, Leo's lower lip started to tremble. "Take it down? But why?" "It's a stupid rule, buddy," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. Maya's eyes welled up. "But it's ours. We love it. It's not fair. Is it because of Mrs. Perkins? Does she hate swings?" "It's not about hate, honey," Lisa tried, shooting me a warning look. "It's just, rules are rules, even when they don't make much sense." "But she is a bad lady, right?" Leo whispered, burying his face in Lisa's shoulder. I didn't answer, just clenched my fists. Seeing my kids heartbroken over a swing set because of some power-tripping neighbor and her army of bylaw-wielding sycophants, something inside me snapped. The simmering resentment boiled over into full-blown molten rage. Oh, Carol Perkins wanted compliance? She wanted rules followed? Fine. But she wasn't going to like how I complied. That night, sleep was impossible. I ended up in the garage around 2 a.m., staring at the sad pile of brightly colored plastic and wood that had, until yesterday evening, been the beloved swing set. Dismantling it while the kids watched from the window, tears streaming down their faces, had been one of the lowest points of my suburban dad career. The offending HOA letter lay on my workbench, next to the monstrously thick Oak Creek Meadows Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions Handbook, a document so dense and mind-numbing it could be used as a sedative. I started flipping through it, not really looking for anything specific, just fueling my anger. Rules for fence height, max 6 feet, white vinyl or approved wood stain only. Rules for shed size and color, max 10x12, must match house trim. Rules for mailbox design, standard black, post-painted HOA-approved beige. Rules for satellite dish placement, must not be visible from street. Rules for garden gnome height, strictly prohibited apparently. Rules for everything. It was suffocating. But then a thought occurred to me. They had rules for everything they could think of. Sheds, fences, pools, playground equipment, clearly defined as slides, swings, climbing structures under 8 feet. But what about things they hadn't thought of? Things so outlandish, so beyond the pale of normal suburban existence, that no one had ever bothered to write a rule explicitly forbidding them. My eyes scanned the index. Gazebos, grills, holiday decorations, seasonal restrictions apply, hot tubs, irrigation systems, landscape lighting. Nothing. Nothing about large rotating structures. Nothing about mechanical rides. Nothing about things that went up, way up. Lisa's sarcastic comment from earlier echoed in my head. What are you going to build next? A roller coaster? Not a roller coaster. Too much horizontal space required. But something else. Something tall. Something circular. Something utterly, undeniably fun that would be visible from every window in Carol Perkins' house. I grabbed a greasy napkin left over from a previous project and started sketching. A circle, spokes, little boxes hanging off it, a big motor at the bottom. It looked ridiculous. It looked impossible. It looked perfect. Okay, I muttered, the gears in my head starting to turn, fueled by caffeine and pure spite. Playground equipment max 8 feet, sheds 10 feet. Gazebos need pre-approval. But what about amusement rides? They don't have a specific section for backyard amusement rides. How could they? Who would be insane enough? It's not a permanent structure if it can theoretically be disassembled, right? It's just large-scale kinetic garden art. A rotating sculpture celebrating the ephemeral nature of childhood joy. Yeah, that's it. I ran back inside, practically vibrating with manic energy, and found Lisa reading in bed. Honey, I began, trying to sound calm. Remember how sad the kids were about the swing set? She lowered her book, eyeing me warily. Greg, it was 3 hours ago. They cried themselves to sleep. Of course I remember. Right, terrible. But what if, I leaned in conspiratorially, what if I could build something even better? Something to make them forget all about that stupid swing set. Something spectacular? Something that reaches for the sky? Greg, what are you talking about? Her suspicion was palpable. Like a bigger slide? A ridiculously oversized trampoline that will definitely violate some other rule? I whipped out the napkin sketch with a flourish. It depicted, in crude Sharpie lines, our house, Carol's house next door, and towering between them a giant stick-figure Ferris wheel. Think bigger, I whispered dramatically. Think higher. Think rotational. Lisa stared at the napkin. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to outright horror. Greg, is that a Ferris wheel? In our backyard? Have you completely, utterly lost your ever-loving mind? I grinned, a slow, dangerous grin that probably made me look like a Bond villain planning world domination via carnival rides. They banned the swing set, Lisa. They pushed me too far. They left me no choice. It's time to escalate. The next few weeks descended into a vortex of obsessive research and borderline delusion. My days were spent pretending to work on marketing campaigns, leveraging synergy for Q3 growth, while my nights were consumed by the nascent dream of the backyard wonder wheel. My internet search history became a terrifying chronicle of a mind unraveling. Used Ferris wheel parts for sale cheap. DIY Ferris wheel tutorial. Safety warning ignore. Calculate load-bearing capacity residential soil. HOA bylaw loopholes. Temporary structures. Art installation. Small electric motor. High torque rotational force. Welding for idiots. Liability insurance backyard amusement device. Spoiler, astronomically expensive, possibly non-existent. I downloaded free CAD software and attempted to design the thing. My creations looked less like functional amusement rides and more like diagrams for medieval torture devices or abstract sculptures titled Impending Structural Collapse. I spent hours on highly questionable engineering forums where anonymous users argued about gear ratios and stress tolerances, citing back-of-the-envelope calculations that seemed wildly optimistic. Lisa watched my descent into madness with growing alarm. Greg, You spent 3 hours last night watching a YouTube video of a guy in Russia who built a Ferris wheel out of old washing machine parts. This isn't healthy. Research, honey, I countered, holding up 2 mismatched gears I'd bought on eBay. Look, primary reduction sprocket and a pinion gear. Gyroscopic precession dictates. Stop talking about gyroscopic precession and help me fold the laundry, she sighed. And please tell me you canceled that bid on the rusty tilt-a-whirl. It was a steal, I protested weakly. Realizing that my own engineering prowess peaked somewhere around assembling IKEA furniture, I conceded I needed help. Professional help. My initial calls to actual engineering firms and amusement ride manufacturers were, shall we say, humbling. Engineer 1, sounding deeply concerned. A backyard Ferris wheel? Sir, are you aware of the permitting process? The geological surveys required for the foundation? The structural calculations needing a licensed professional engineer's stamp? The mandatory safety inspections? The astronomical liability insurance? We're talking a minimum investment comparable to buying a second house. Me. But it's more of an artistic statement? Engineer 1. We design bridges, sir, not artistic statements that could potentially collapse and kill someone. I suggest you speak to a therapist. Click. Ride manufacturer, barely suppressing laughter. Sell you one? Sure thing, pal. Our starter model, the Little Dipper 30-footer, only runs about $500,000 plus shipping and installation. You got commercial zoning and an operator's license? Me. No, it's residential. Ride manufacturer. Then stick to swing sets, buddy, or maybe a nice bird bath. Click. Construction firm, voice thick with disbelief. Let me get this straight. You want us to erect a 40-foot steel wheel in your backyard? Next to your petunias? Me. Essentially, yes. It's a kinetic sculpture. Construction firm. We build skyscrapers. We build infrastructure. We don't build carnival rides in subdivisions governed by HOAs. You're asking for a world of pain, my friend. Good luck. Click. Okay. The reputable professional route was a dead end. They were too concerned with trivialities like safety, legality, and sanity. I needed people who operated outside the mainstream. People who saw a challenge, not an insurance nightmare. People who understood the noble pursuit of spite-fueled engineering. I found them in the classifieds section of an old grease-stained mechanics trade paper I picked up at a garage sale. Tucked between ads for used carburetors and industrial degreaser was a small, intriguing notice. Sparks and gyro. We fix anything that moves, or should. Engines rebuilt, structures welded, gears ground, problems solved. Specializing in eccentric engineering and obsolete machinery. No job too weird. Reasonable rates, usually. Eccentric engineering. No job too weird. This sounded promising. I called the number. A gruff voice answered with a single word. Yeah? Hi. I'm looking for Sparks or Gyro? Gyro here. Sparks don't talk much. What you need fixed or built? Well, I took a deep breath. It's more of a built situation. I want to build a Ferris wheel in my backyard, about 40 feet tall. There was a pause, filled only with the sound of what might have been a wrench hitting concrete. Then, Gyro's voice came back, suddenly alive with enthusiasm. A backyard Ferris wheel, 40-footer? You serious, Sonny? What kind of drive system you thinking? Double armature reciprocal, chain and sprocket? Gotta consider the torque converter, the gear reduction, the braking mechanism. Oh, the bearings you'll need. Used to maintain the zipper down at Coney Island back in the day. Let me tell you, that thing was a beast. Why you want to build a Ferris wheel in your yard anyway? Long story short, I said, the HOA banned my kid's swing set. Gyro let out a whoop of laughter. Revenge via rotational amusement device. Beautiful, Sparks. Get the big welder. We got a live one. Their workshop was a glorious cathedral of controlled chaos, a cavernous garage filled with greasy engine parts, mysterious metal contraptions, welding tanks, lathes, and the faint smell of ozone and old oil. Sparks turned out to be a mountain of a man with soot-stained overalls and arms like hydraulic pistons, who communicated primarily through grunts and nods. Gyro was his opposite, wiry, energetic, constantly talking, gesturing with grease-stained hands, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a new, bizarre project. They looked over my crude sketches. Sparks poked at the napkin with a thick finger and grunted, "Steel, lots of welding." Gyro peered at it through smudged glasses. "Foundation's key. Gotta be over-engineered for rotational stability and uneven loading. We pour concrete thick enough to anchor a battleship. Motor, gotta source a good variable speed DC motor. Gearbox, custom job probably. Gondolas, maybe salvage some old ski lift chairs." "So," I asked tentatively, "you'll do it?" Gyro clapped me on the back, leaving a greasy handprint on my shirt. "Do it? Sonny, building a 40-foot backyard Ferris wheel to stick it to some pencil-pushing HOA is the most beautiful reason for applied mechanics I've heard all year. It's practically a public service. Sparks, let's price out some I-beams." Sparks nodded slowly, a faint smile cracking his stoic facade. "Sparks," he agreed. Construction began the following Monday, and Oak Creek Meadows would never be the same. The first sign of trouble, from the neighborhood's perspective, was the cement truck. A massive, churning behemoth navigating our quiet suburban street, leaving muddy tracks on the pristine asphalt before backing into my driveway. Gyro supervised the pouring of a concrete foundation so immense it looked like a Cold War missile silo cap. "Can't skimp on the base," he declared cheerfully over the roar of the truck. "Gotta handle the dynamic load." Next came the steel. A huge flatbed truck arrived, laden with enormous, rusty-looking I-beams. It blocked traffic for nearly an hour, while Sparks used a small crane, that seemed to appear out of nowhere, to unload them onto my increasingly traumatized lawn. Curtains twitched. Phones came out. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up like a Christmas tree with variations of, "OMG, what is Greg Johnson building back there?" Then the real noise started. The shriek of metal grinders. The percussive thump, thump, thump of sparks hammering beams into place. The blinding flash and angry buzz of the welding arc, often accompanied by Sparks yelling, "Fire in the hole," for no apparent reason. And overlaying it all, Gyro's constant stream of chatter, occasionally breaking into surprisingly robust renditions of old sea shanties or carnival tunes. Carol Perkins's surveillance escalated from window peering to full-on lawn patrols. She'd march back and forth along the property line, phone held high, documenting every perceived infraction. "Gregory," she accosted me one evening as I brought Sparks and Gyro lukewarm lemonade. She practically vibrated with indignation. "What is the meaning of this industrial construction site in your backyard? It's violating at least 6 noise ordinances. There's debris everywhere. That welding glare is a menace." I gave her my brightest, most infuriatingly cheerful smile. "Just working on a little garden project, Carol. A kinetic sculpture, very modern art. It explores themes of rotation and suburban ennui." "That looks like the beginning of an oil rig," she sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of puce. "Or a prison watchtower. I am reporting this to the board, the city, the county, and possibly the EPA immediately." "You do that, Carol," I called after her, retreating back. "Tell them Greg Johnson is expressing his artistic vision, vertically and rotationally." The official letters started arriving like clockwork. Beige envelopes, certified mail, courier deliveries. Cease and desist orders citing Bylaw 18. Unapproved structures. Bylaw 25, nuisance abatement. Bylaw 12, construction hours and debris. Notices of daily fines, now escalating to $150 for violations ranging from improper equipment storage, sparks welding tanks, to aesthetic disharmony. Threats of liens, lawsuits, forced removal at my expense. I developed a routine. Sign for the letter, open it, snort derisively, read the most ridiculous parts aloud to Lisa, who would just groan, and then hand it to Sparks, who used the thick paper for sketching crude designs or wiping grease off tools. I'd found what I believed was a loophole, a vaguely worded section in Appendix F about temporary decorative installations and artistic expressions that didn't explicitly mention height limits or mechanical components. It was flimsy, I knew, but it was all I had besides sheer bloody-mindedness. Inevitably, Carol's complaints reached City Hall. One sweltering afternoon, a police cruiser pulled up, followed by a nondescript city sedan. Two uniformed officers and a weary-looking man in a slightly too tight polo shirt, identifying him as a city inspector, trudged up my driveway. They stopped at the entrance to the backyard and just stared. The basic structure of the wheel was now assembled, a giant skeletal circle of steel beams held aloft by massive A-frames, towering a good 20 feet over my roofline. It looked like something salvaged from a post-apocalyptic amusement park. "Okay, Mr. Johnson," the inspector began, adjusting his glasses and consulting a clipboard that seemed woefully inadequate for the situation. "What, exactly, is this structure?" I launched into my prepared speech. "Gentlemen, welcome. This is my kinetic garden sculpture, tentatively titled Rotation Study in Suburban Blue. It's inspired by the works of Leonardo da Vinci, exploring the interplay between circular motion and the rectilinear constraints of the modern built environment." One of the police officers squinted at it. "Looks like a Ferris wheel, sir." "An artistic interpretation of the Ferris wheel form," I corrected smoothly. "It celebrates the cyclical nature of, childhood joy and the relentless passage of time." Gyro, overhearing us, poked his grease-covered head out from under the main axle he was adjusting. "And it's got a triple redundant electromagnetic braking system. Safety first, gents," he beamed, brandishing a large wrench. The inspector sighed heavily, flipping through pages on his clipboard. "Okay, Mr. Johnson, there's nothing in the city code that explicitly forbids kinetic garden sculptures. However," his voice hardened, "this structure clearly exceeds residential height limits, and its intended purpose seems questionable. Do you have permits for this? Stamped engineering reports? Soil stability tests?" "Permits?" I feigned surprise. "But it's art. And technically it's temporary if I can theoretically take it apart someday, right? City Ordinance 47B regarding temporary installations doesn't specify—" I started reciting my flawed interpretation of the municipal code. The inspector held up a hand, cutting me off. "Sir, we're going to have to investigate this further. There are serious safety and zoning concerns here. In the meantime, keep the construction noise within designated hours, ensure the site is secured, and don't even think about putting anyone on that thing." They left, looking baffled and vaguely threatening. Carol, watching from her porch, looked momentarily thwarted but deeply suspicious. I felt a surge of adrenaline, round one to Team Ferris wheel, but I knew the city wouldn't just let it go. The clock was ticking. The next few weeks were a race against the inevitable bureaucratic crackdown. Sparks worked tirelessly, welding the gondola supports and reinforcing joints with enough steel to build a small tank. Gyro tinkered endlessly with the motor, a salvaged industrial unit that hummed with menacing power, rigging up the drive chain and the complex braking system. Lisa oscillated between anxious pacing and grudging admiration for the sheer audacity of it all. The kids, initially confused, were now vibrating with excitement, asking daily, "Is the Ferris wheel ready yet, Daddy?" We even sourced the gondolas, 6 brightly colored, slightly dented fiberglass tubs that Gyro claimed came off a defunct kiddie ride called the Dizzy Dragons he'd helped dismantle years ago. Sparks bolted them onto the frame. Suddenly, it didn't look like a sculpture at all. It looked exactly like what it was. A 40-foot Ferris wheel squatting incongruously in a suburban backyard. It towered over my 2-story house. It cast long, rotating shadows across Carol's prize-winning petunias. It was visible from the main road, 3 blocks away. Oak Creek Meadows was now firmly divided. Team Greg consisted of amused neighbors who secretly hated the HOA, teenagers who thought it was awesome, and random strangers who drove by just to gawk. Team Carol was composed of the HOA board, residents terrified about property values, and anyone who used phrases like aesthetic harmony unironically. The neighborhood Facebook group became a war zone. Lisa cornered me one evening, holding 2 new HOA violation notices. "Greg, it's 40 feet tall. It has seats. Actual seats. You cannot possibly keep calling it a kinetic sculpture. Mrs. Henderson told me 3 families on the next street are talking about putting their houses up for sale because of the visual blight." "Let them talk," I declared, perhaps a little too loudly. "It's magnificent. Look how the setting sun glints off the primary drive sprocket. It's beautiful." "Carol hasn't left her house in 2 days," Lisa reported grimly. "But I saw her through the window. I think she was on the phone with a lawyer, and possibly digging a trench along the property line." The inevitable media storm broke shortly after. A reporter from the local news station, probably tipped off by a gleeful Team Greg member, or possibly Gyro, who seemed to enjoy the notoriety, showed up with a camera crew. The headline that night: "Suburban Dad Builds 40-Foot Ferris Wheel to Spite HOA After Swing Set Ban." My phone started ringing off the hook. Other local stations, regional news, even a producer from some national morning show called. I gave rambling, slightly unhinged interviews, talking about artistic freedom, the tyranny of petty rules, and the fundamental human right to rotational backyard fun. Carol, initially refusing comment, eventually gave a tearful interview to Channel 5, lamenting the destruction of neighborhood character, her fear of heights, and the potential for catastrophic property value decline. #Ferris wheel food, #HOA heck, and #backyard bonkers started trending on Twitter. My homeowner's insurance company called, not to offer congratulations, but to inform me my policy was being immediately canceled due to operating an unpermitted high-risk amusement device on residential property. The HOA board scheduled an emergency, closed-door meeting, presumably to discuss options ranging from lawsuits to hiring their own demolition crew. The fun, however, was short-lived. The city, armed with Carol's tearful testimony and probably dozens of other complaints, decided they'd had enough of my artistic expression. The weary inspector returned, but this time he wasn't alone. He was flanked by a stern woman in a power suit who introduced herself as the city attorney, and a burly fire department chief whose expression suggested he'd rather be fighting actual fires than dealing with my nonsense. "Mr. Johnson," the city attorney began, her voice leaving no room for argument, "let's dispense with the kinetic art charade. What you have constructed here is an unpermitted, unlicensed, and fundamentally unsafe amusement device." She ticked off points on her fingers. "It violates City Zoning Ordinance Z 117.4 regarding accessory structure height limits, maximum 15 feet, yours is 40. It violates Municipal Safety Code S54. B. Paragraphs 1 through 27 regarding construction, maintenance, and operation of mechanical rides. It constitutes a public nuisance under Penal Code Section 370. You lack the required engineering certifications, the mandatory state safety inspections, the minimum $5 million liability insurance policy required for amusement devices, and the special operating permits, which, I assure you, the city will never grant for a residential zone. I opened my mouth to argue, to cite Appendix F again, but she cut me off. City ordinances and state safety codes comprehensively trump any perceived loophole in your HOA bylaws, Mr. Johnson, especially when public safety is demonstrably at risk. This structure is unsafe, unpermitted, and patently illegal. She fixed me with a steely gaze. You have 72 hours to cease all operation, not that it should ever have operated, and provide the city with a concrete plan and timeline for its complete dismantling. If you fail to comply, the city will dismantle it, and you will be billed for every penny of the cost, in addition to facing significant daily fines and potential criminal charges. But, I stammered, desperation setting in. The kids, they haven't even had one ride yet. The fire chief stepped forward. And they won't be getting one, son. Not unless you want us condemning this entire property as unsafe for habitation. This thing comes down, now. 72 hours. It was over. All the planning, the expense, the arguments, the sheer glorious absurdity of it, ending not with a triumphant rotation, but with a bureaucratic smackdown. But they couldn't take away the idea. And they couldn't stop me from getting one turn, just one. That night, under the cloak of a moonless sky, I crept out to the backyard. Sparks and Gyro were long gone, having collected their final, substantial payment with sympathetic shrugs. The giant wheel loomed silently against the stars. I checked the connections Gyro had shown me, flipped the main breaker, and approached the control panel. A surprisingly simple setup with a big red button and a lever. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was stupid. This was reckless. This was probably illegal. I pressed the button. With a low groan and a shudder that vibrated through the concrete slab beneath my feet, the motor kicked in. The massive chain drive engaged. Slowly, hesitantly, the giant wheel began to turn. It was jerky, noisy, and probably terrifyingly unsafe, but it was moving. "Kids! Lisa!" I whisper-shouted towards the house. "Quick! One ride!" Lisa appeared at the back door, silhouetted, her arms crossed. "Greg, absolutely not. Are you insane? They just threatened to arrest you." "But Lisa, just once around, for the principal." Before she could argue further, flashing blue and red lights swept across the backyard. A police car, siren now blaring, screeched to a halt at the end of my driveway. Someone, Carol, undoubtedly, must have been watching, phone poised. I slammed the emergency stop button. The wheel groaned to a halt, one of the Dizzy Dragon gondolas swaying precariously halfway up. My maiden voyage, my one act of rotational defiance, lasted approximately 15 seconds. The final reckoning came a week later at a specially convened city council meeting. The room was packed. Angry neighbors, amused neighbors, reporters, city officials, Lisa looking mortified, me looking defiant, but mostly exhausted. The city attorney laid out the litany of code violations. Carol Perkins gave a trembling speech about living in fear of that monstrous contraption collapsing onto her prize-winning begonias. When it was my turn, I didn't have Barry Goldblatt or some other legal eagle. I just stood up and spoke. I told them about the swing set, about how it felt to have something small and joyful taken away by petty rules. I admitted the Ferris wheel was maybe, possibly, a slight overreaction. I talked about wanting to do something big and fun for my kids. I might have mentioned Carol's binoculars. I didn't apologize, exactly, but I acknowledged the disruption. It didn't matter. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The Ferris wheel had to be dismantled immediately, and I was on the hook for the cost, plus a hefty fine for violating multiple city ordinances. Weeks later, the backyard was quiet again. Eerily quiet. A professional demolition crew had made short work of the Ferris wheel, leaving behind only the ridiculously oversized concrete slab, a tombstone marking the grave of my grand, foolish dream. The grass around it was trampled and muddy. One evening, Lisa, the kids, and I were sitting out on the slab, eating popsicles. The silence felt heavy. "Is the Ferris wheel ever coming back, Daddy?" Maya asked quietly, licking her orange popsicle. I sighed, putting my arm around her. "No, sweetie, I don't think so. It was just too big for our backyard." "Did Mrs. Perkins win?" Leo asked, his brow furrowed. "Nobody really wins in things like this, buddy," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Let's just say, the neighborhood is back to normal now." Lisa leaned against me, finishing her popsicle. "You know," she said softly, a hint of amusement in her voice. "For what it's worth..." It was kind of spectacular while it lasted. Completely insane, utterly irresponsible, and probably shaved 5 years off my life expectancy. But spectacular. I looked at the empty space where the wheel had stood, then glanced towards the garage. Yeah. A thought sparked, much smaller and less insane this time. You know what? I think I still have those swing set parts stacked in the corner of the garage. Maybe I could paint them beige? Lisa groaned, but she was smiling. The kids looked up, hope dawning in their eyes. So, did I win the war against the HOA? Absolutely not. It cost me a small fortune, nearly landed me in jail, and permanently cemented my status as the neighborhood lunatic who built a Ferris wheel. But did I make Carol Perkins and the entire HOA board think twice about the arbitrary enforcement of soul-crushing rules? Maybe. Did I give my kids, and frankly myself, a story we'd be telling for the rest of our lives? Definitely. And as I sat there on that useless concrete slab, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues far more vibrant than HOA-approved beige, I had to admit, even without a single rotation, the view felt just a little bit better. The war on petty tyranny might be unwinnable, but sometimes, just sometimes, escalating to utter absurdity feels like its own kind of victory. Now, about that beige paint.